Maya Carter was just trying to get to her next class. At 16, she had enough on her plate: homework, social pressures, and the usual struggles of teenage life. But on this particular day, as she walked down the crowded hallway, the unexpected happened. "Hey, stop right there!" The voice was authoritative, sharp, and unmistakably directed at her. Officer Bradley Walker, the school's resource officer, was standing just a few feet away, his expression unreadable but his presence dominating. "You match a description," he said, eyes scanning her from head to toe. Maya froze. What description? Who was he looking for? Her heart pounded as she felt every pair of eyes in the hallway shift toward her. The air suddenly felt heavier. "Empty your backpack," Officer Walker ordered. Maya hesitated. Why should she? Wasn't she supposed to have rights? She had done nothing wrong. The weight of injustice pressed against her chest, but so did the knowledge that defying authority often came with consequences. "Sir, I—" Before she could finish, Officer Walker grabbed her arm. The world blurred as she was shoved against the cold, unforgiving metal lockers. The sharp clang echoed through the hallway. A collective gasp rippled through the students watching. Some raised their phones, capturing the moment. The click of handcuffs snapped against her wrists. The pain was immediate, physical, yes, but also something deeper. A pain that came from humiliation, from powerlessness. And yet no one stepped forward. Not a single voice protested. The hallway, once filled with chatter and laughter, was now eerily silent. Was it fear? Indifference? The belief that stepping in would only make things worse? Maya fought back tears. She knew that after this moment, nothing would be the same. Her reputation, her sense of safety, her trust in authority, everything had been shattered in an instant. As she was led away, her classmates continued to record. The world would see this, on social media, in the news, in whispered conversations. But would that change anything? Would people care once the next viral video took over? What would you have done if you were there? Would you have spoken up? Or would you have watched in silence like the others? The tension in the school hallway was suffocating. The metallic clink of Maya Carter's handcuffs still echoed as she stood against the cold lockers, her wrists aching, her dignity stripped away in front of dozens of silent classmates. Phones were still raised, recording every second. And then, "Take your hands off my daughter." The voice was firm, authoritative, a voice that had commanded rooms filled with criminals and law enforcement alike. James Carter, an FBI agent with over a decade of experience, had witnessed the entire confrontation. His instincts, honed from years of high-stakes operations, had immediately identified the abuse of power unfolding before him. But this time it wasn't just another case. It was his daughter. Officer Bradley Walker barely spared him a glance. "Sir, this is school protocol. She matches the description of a suspect, and I have the right to search her belongings." James stepped forward, his presence suddenly towering. "You had no probable cause. You physically assaulted a minor in front of witnesses. You didn't follow proper procedure. Now, I'm telling you one last time, take those cuffs off, now." But Walker held his ground. He wasn't ready to back down, not yet. He had gotten away with actions like this before, pushing his authority a little too far, flexing his power in ways that made kids shrink with fear. This time, though, he had miscalculated. Without breaking eye contact, James reached into his pocket and flipped open his badge. The effect was immediate. The flicker of confidence in Walker's eyes dimmed. His grip on Maya loosened, and his posture stiffened, not out of authority, but fear. He had just handcuffed the daughter of an FBI agent. "You're obstructing justice, officer," James said, his voice calm but edged with a warning. "And if you don't take those cuffs off in the next 5 seconds, I'll make sure you're the one who gets escorted out in handcuffs." The weight of Maya's question hung in the air, unanswered. The students who had watched in silence seemed to shrink under the reality of what had just unfolded. Some may have felt guilty for not intervening, but the truth was, most of them hadn't known what to do. When faced with authority, especially authority that demanded obedience, like Officer Walker, they had retreated into the safety of passivity. Would they have stepped in if Maya had been someone else's daughter? Or did the power of Walker's badge and his confident demeanor make them doubt themselves? Maya's gaze lingered on the faces of her classmates, some still holding their phones, others trying to disappear into the walls of the hallway. They had witnessed her humiliation, but had they seen the injustice? Had they understood the larger message? Her father's protective presence had been the only thing that stopped the situation from spiraling further. But as she walked away, Maya knew that the emotional scars would remain longer than the physical ones. The incident, now immortalized on social media, would follow her for as long as she remained in that school. "Thank you," she whispered to her father, her voice breaking slightly. The moment felt fragile, the weight of everything too heavy to process all at once. James nodded, pulling her into a brief hug. "You're not alone in this, Maya. I'm here. We'll get through this." But even as he spoke, he knew that words couldn't erase the lasting impact of this moment, on Maya, on their family, and on the community around them. The truth was, things would never be the same. Maya's trust in authority had been shaken. The power dynamics at play had been laid bare in front of her peers. She would never again see the world with the same naive certainty. And in a deeper sense, neither would the school. The system that allowed this to happen, that allowed an officer to wield his power so recklessly, would now face scrutiny. James, as an FBI agent, knew that this wasn't just about one rogue officer. It was about a culture that normalized overreach, that failed to hold its figures of authority accountable, and that often turned a blind eye when it was uncomfortable to speak up. Maya's ordeal was a reminder that silence in the face of injustice was its own form of complicity. The incident wasn't over when the handcuffs were removed. It was just beginning. "Dad," Maya said quietly as they left the hallway behind them, "what happens next?" James paused before answering. "We make sure no one forgets." The aftermath of Maya's ordeal and the investigation that followed marked a significant turning point. But the question remained, was this true justice, or was it just a glimpse of accountability in a system built to protect its own? For James Carter, the victory of getting Officer Walker fired and arrested was bittersweet. The systemic failure to hold Walker accountable for his previous actions and the leniency of the plea deal left him with a sense of unease. While Walker had lost his badge, that alone didn't feel like enough. It didn't undo the harm he had caused, nor did it restore the trust that had been broken. The community, especially those who had been directly impacted by Walker's misconduct, knew that the damage extended beyond the individual officer. It was a reflection of a broader problem that ran through the system. Maya, on the other hand, felt conflicted. The public attention and the changes that came as a result of her incident had brought her a sense of vindication, but also an overwhelming exposure. No longer just a victim, she was now a symbol of the fight for justice. But with that new role came an immense weight. As her father had said, no one would forget. Would she be forever defined by this moment, or could she move past it? In the days that followed, Maya found herself grappling with the mixed emotions of seeing Officer Walker punished while still confronting her own trauma. Her classmates, some of whom had recorded the incident, seemed to treat her as a spectacle. Some congratulated her for standing up to authority. Others whispered behind her back, unable to reconcile the new reality of her life. But through it all, Maya realized something crucial. This experience, as painful as it had been, had ignited a sense of agency in her. She was no longer a passive bystander in her own story. She had been the catalyst for change, and that, for all its difficulty, was empowering. As for James, the investigation into Officer Walker revealed something far more troubling. This was not an isolated case of abuse of power. There were other officers, other incidents, and a culture of silence that allowed misconduct to thrive unchecked. He knew that this wasn't just about Walker anymore. It was about addressing the root of the problem. The school board, the police department, and even local lawmakers began to feel the pressure for reform. James knew that real change would take time, and it would require more than just a few headlines. It would need systemic change, a reimagining of how power was wielded and how accountability was enforced. But the fire had been lit. Maya's experience had become a rallying point for those who were tired of seeing power misused. The voices of those who had been silenced for too long began to grow louder. Parents, students, and activists stood alongside James and Maya, pushing for more than just a single victory. They demanded a shift in the culture, a shift that would prioritize justice over silence. As James sat in his office, the files on his desk now filled with evidence of years of misconduct, he understood that this was just the beginning. It wasn't just about getting justice for Maya. It was about holding a system accountable, a system that had allowed power to go unchecked for far too long. And in that moment, he felt a sense of resolve. Maya's ordeal had sparked the change, but it was up to him, and to all those who stood with them, to ensure it didn't stop there. Change was possible, but it would take courage, perseverance, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The fight for justice wasn't over, it had only just begun. Maya, you don't have to carry this on your own. I know it's hard, but you've done something incredible. You've shown people that abuse of power, especially in the name of authority, will not be tolerated. It's a message that others needed to hear, James said, his voice soft but firm. Maya didn't meet his eyes. I know what I did, but I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be the person everyone's talking about, the one everyone's staring at. I just wanted to be a normal kid. And now, I'm the girl who got dragged away in handcuffs. I didn't ask for that kind of attention. I know, he said, leaning in closer. But sometimes we don't get to choose how our story is told. The important thing is how you choose to move forward from here. But what if I don't want to move forward? Maya whispered. What if it hurts too much to even try? James didn't have an immediate answer. He had dealt with his own form of trauma over the years, but he had never walked in her shoes. He could empathize, but he couldn't fully understand. Maya, healing takes time. It's okay to feel angry, sad, confused. You're allowed to feel all of that, but you can't let it define you. And as for what people say or think, you can't control them. What you can control is how you let it affect you. I just want things to go back to normal, she muttered, her voice breaking slightly. I just want to be me again. James nodded, understanding more than he let on. I wish I could wave a magic wand and make everything better. But I promise you, Maya, you're stronger than you think. You're going to find your way through this. And when you do, the world is going to see you for who you really are. Not the girl in that video, but the girl who stood up, even when it wasn't easy. Maya nodded, though her eyes were still clouded with doubt. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but his words were comforting in their own way. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. The next morning, as Maya walked through the school doors, she felt the familiar weight of eyes upon her. But this time, something had shifted. There was a quiet resolve within her, a glimmer of strength that hadn't been there before. She would find a way to keep moving forward. The road ahead might be long, and she knew it wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't going to let the world's judgment define her. She had been through the fire and come out on the other side stronger than before. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to make the truth matter. Would you have the courage to keep going, even when the world feels like it's closing in around you? Would you stay true to yourself, even when everything seems lost? Her voice shook, but she pushed through. But what scared me even more was that I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the first, and I won't be the last. Every day, kids are silenced, ignored, and sometimes hurt in ways that don't make the news. And the silence that follows? That's the real crime. That's what keeps the system broken. It's what lets it happen again and again. She paused, her heart pounding in her chest, but she held her ground. I'm standing here today because I won't let that silence define me. I won't let fear be the reason nothing changes. I deserve to be heard. And so do the countless others who have been victims of the same abuse of power, who are too scared to speak out because they don't have a voice. It's time to fix that. Her eyes scanned the room, her classmates, the parents, the teachers, and most importantly, the school board members. This was her moment to make them see, to make them listen. I want change. I want accountability. I want a system that protects students, that listens to them when they say they're hurt or scared. I want officers who understand their role isn't to intimidate, but to protect. And I want everyone who sees injustice happening to have the courage to speak up. Not just when it's easy, but when it's uncomfortable, when it's hard, when it feels like no one's listening. Maya's hands were still trembling, but the words were flowing now, as though the anger and pain inside her were finally being released, one sentence at a time. I don't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else, and I'm going to fight, no matter what it takes, to make sure of it. She finished speaking, and for a long moment there was silence. The kind of silence that felt heavy, like 1,000 questions were hanging in the air, the kind that begged for action, begged for something to change. Then, slowly, people began to clap. It started as a few, then spread across the room, as if everyone had been waiting for someone to take that first step, to have the courage to speak out. Maya stepped away from the podium, her heart still racing, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with hope. Hope that her voice had been heard, hope that things could be different. As she walked back to her seat, she caught her father's eye. He gave her a small, proud nod. She didn't need any more validation. She knew, deep down, that she had done what needed to be done. And for the first time in a long while, Maya felt a glimmer of peace amidst the chaos. It wasn't the end, but it was a start of something bigger, something that couldn't be ignored. Would you have had the courage to speak out like Maya, or would you have stayed silent, hoping someone else would step up? The conversations that followed were intense and widespread. Parents and students across the country joined in, sharing their own stories of mistreatment, racial profiling, and unjust discipline. Activists organized protests and petitions, demanding reform in school policing practices. The hashtag Justice for Maya trended online, bringing attention to the issue of police presence in schools and the treatment of students, especially students of color. Maya was invited to speak at rallies, community forums, and even national conferences. She became the face of a movement she hadn't intended to start, but one she had no choice but to lead. Her father, James, stood by her side, proud of the strength she had found within herself, but also determined to help her navigate the growing pressure and spotlight. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. Every time Maya spoke out, she faced backlash. Some criticized her for making a scene, for shaming the school and the police, for not respecting authority. Others questioned her motives, trying to discredit her voice by painting her as a troublemaker or someone seeking attention. At school, the stares didn't stop. Some students admired her bravery, others resented it. And despite the broad public support she received, there were moments when Maya felt like she was still the girl in the video, the girl who had been handcuffed, the girl who had been humiliated. But with each challenge came growth. She learned to embrace her voice, to use it not just for herself, but for others who had been silenced. She met with local lawmakers to push for school police reform, advocating for increased oversight and transparency in how officers interacted with students. She helped create support groups for students who had experienced similar treatment, providing a space for them to share their stories and find solidarity. Over time, the pressure and the pain began to feel more manageable. Maya wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. And through her actions, she helped lay the groundwork for policy changes in her district and beyond. Some schools reassessed their use of resource officers, others implemented new training programs on racial sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. The change was slow, but it was undeniable, and it all started with Maya's decision to speak up when it would have been easier to remain silent. Would you have the strength to continue fighting, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain and difficult? Would you risk your own comfort to ensure that the voices of others are heard? Maya's journey teaches us that real change doesn't come without struggle, but it's the courage to face that struggle that makes all the difference. The father who had once worked quietly behind the scenes in the FBI now found himself on the front lines of a new battle. A battle not just for justice, but for systemic change. He had always fought for others, but this time it was personal. His daughter had been victimized by an abuse of power, and it ignited a fire in him that he couldn't ignore. James used his position to amplify Maya's voice, pushing for reforms in law enforcement and advocating for more accountability. He took the lessons he had learned throughout his career and applied them to the public fight for justice. He knew that change required not just a single victory, but a concerted effort to shift the entire system. And that's exactly what he did. He worked with activists, lawmakers, and organizations, advocating for stronger accountability measures in police work, especially in schools. He pushed for greater transparency, demanding that officers undergo thorough psychological evaluations and ongoing training to prevent abuses of power. He also called for the creation of independent oversight committees to investigate complaints and ensure that officers who violated their duty were held accountable. James's efforts were met with both praise and opposition, but he never wavered. He understood that the fight for justice didn't end with the fall of Officer Walker. It was part of a much larger, ongoing struggle. His personal connection to the issue only fueled his determination to see it through to the end. And through it all, he stood by Maya. As she navigated the complex emotions of becoming an advocate, he made sure she had the support she needed to continue speaking out and challenging the system. He saw the toll it took on her, but he also saw the strength she had found in herself. She had become a force to be reckoned with, a voice that could not be ignored. The legacy of Maya's courage and James's relentless pursuit of justice began to shape the future of their community and beyond. It wasn't just about one incident. It was about a movement born from pain, but driven by the hope of creating something better for the generations to come. And as Maya stood beside her father, she knew that their fight was far from over. But now she didn't face it alone, and together they would continue to push for the change they knew was possible. Would you have the strength to continue fighting for what's right, even when the road ahead is long and uncertain? Would you stand up to injustice, knowing that your actions could inspire others to do the same? Maya's journey shows us that even in the face of adversity, courage and determination can spark a movement capable of changing the world. 2. Systemic injustice and accountability. Maya's case highlighted the flaws in the system, where misconduct often went unchecked and complaints were silenced. Her experience forced a much-needed conversation about accountability within law enforcement and the structures that shielded officers from facing consequences for their actions. 3. Youth empowerment and advocacy. Maya's courage to stand up for herself transformed her from a victim to an advocate, inspiring other students to find their voices and demand justice. Her journey shows how youth can be a powerful force for social change when given the platform and support to speak up. 4. The role of allies in social change. James Carter's unwavering support for Maya was crucial in her fight for justice. His actions also illustrate the importance of allies in the pursuit of systemic change. He didn't just protect his daughter, but he used his position to hold the system accountable, proving that collective efforts can bring about reform. 5. The impact of social media and public outcry. The video of Maya's encounter became a catalyst for change, showing how social media can both amplify personal pain and spark societal movements. It raised awareness on a scale that forced schools, law enforcement, and communities to confront uncomfortable truths, pushing them toward action. 6. Transforming trauma into purpose. Maya's personal trauma wasn't just something she had to survive. It became the fuel for her advocacy work. Her ability to channel pain into purpose is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of turning adversity into a force for positive change. Maya's story is a powerful reminder that, in the face of injustice, one person's fight can ripple outward, challenging the status quo and pushing society toward progress. Her journey is both deeply personal and universally resonant, serving as a call to action for anyone who has ever faced oppression or witnessed injustice. When faced with adversity, will we cower in fear, or will we rise up, armed with the power of our voices, and fight for a better tomorrow? Maya's story shows us that with courage, determination, and the support of those who stand beside us, we can not only change our own lives but also the lives of others. Maya wasn't stopped in the hallway because she was a suspect. She was stopped because she matched a description, a vague, racially coded excuse. This moment is not just about one officer's bad judgment. It's about a larger pattern, one that is played out in schools, neighborhoods, and cities across the country. Question for reflection. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment where someone was judged unfairly based on appearance alone? 2. Parental protection. A father going to great lengths to protect his daughter and seek justice. James Carter is more than just an FBI agent. He's a father first. His instinct isn't just to fight for justice, but to shield his daughter from the pain of a broken system. But even with all his experience, he cannot undo what has already happened. His badge can get the handcuffs off, but it can't erase the humiliation Maya endured. His story highlights an important truth. Even the most powerful individuals are sometimes powerless against systemic injustice. Question for reflection. How far would you go to protect someone you love? Courage and advocacy. Maya transforms her trauma into activism, inspiring change. At first, Maya is humiliated, defeated, and afraid. She wonders if speaking up will make things worse. But instead of retreating, she finds her voice. Her speech to the school board isn't just about what happened to her. It's about a system that has failed too many students for too long. She proves that one voice can spark a movement. Question for reflection. When faced with injustice, do you speak up or do you stay silent? 4. Justice versus systemic issues. Even though the officer is removed, the broader system still needs reform. Officer Walker is fired. He is disgraced. He is banned from law enforcement. But is that enough? The system that allowed him to get away with his abuses for so long is still standing. The students who stayed silent are still afraid. The policies that allowed his misconduct to be buried still exist in other schools. Maya's fight doesn't end when Walker is gone. Real justice isn't about removing one bad officer, it's about ensuring there won't be another. Question for reflection. Is removing one bad actor enough, or does the entire system need to change? Final thought. Maya's story is about more than one incident in a school hallway. It's about power, who has it, who abuses it, and who fights back. It's about injustice, the kind that hides in plain sight. It's about courage, the kind that forces the world to change. And in the end, The real question is, when the moment comes, will you be the one who speaks up or the one who stays silent?